Hi, welcome to my sketchbooks. I'm going to be showing you the best and the worst of these pages while also talking about whether I think anyone can learn how to draw. I wanted to start this video off with my current sketchbook. And when I say current sketchbook, I should acknowledge that I did start this one in February of 2021, which would be more than 2 years ago. Also, I should maybe acknowledge that after the last video I made, pointed out how many art style videos there are. This video might be a bit hypocritical, as art sketchbook tours are probably even more overdone, but I wanted to use this video as a way to introduce myself here on YouTube. And what better way to do that than to let you into my sketchbooks? So my name is Morgan. I'm a graphic designer and an illustrator. I went to school for both of those things. I like consuming things such as television shows, movies, internet videos. I'm a big fan of Pedro Pascal, as exemplified in this streak of sketches of him. I wasn't working consistently in the sketchbook. I took a break. There's some stuff from the end of 2022, and then most of the work here is from the past few months. I got really into doing these gestural drawings and studies, whether it's hands or animals. Recently, I've been working on a lot of bigger paintings and projects, so the sketchbook has really become just a low-pressure place to warm up before I jump into other projects. Another point is I'd consider myself mainly a digital artist, so my drawings don't even start with sketches like they used to. But I've been trying to reincorporate sketching into my art practice, and I've noticed a difference. I should also say about myself, I do really like making fan art, and that's something I've always done. I'm a big fan of Germa. I went through a bit of a hyperfixation phase here, where I was drawing him a lot. I also really enjoy my commentary YouTubers. I'm obsessed with Bella Ramsey, and I'm excited to see Josh Hutcherson in the FNAF movie. So this is probably the most random collection of interests, so there's that. Now jumping back to my first ever sketchbook, which unfortunately has the Harry Potter cover. I have no idea where I got this notebook, but there's not even 10 pages filled out before I gave up on this. At the time, I didn't really consider this to be my first sketchbook because it's so empty and sad. But it was this next sketchbook, which I started an entire year later, that was officially the first one. At this point, I was spending a lot of time in fandom spaces, and I was trying to imitate the fan art I was seeing, which at the time was mostly YouTubers like Dan and Phil, Kick the PJ, and Dawdle. The reason I specifically started this sketchbook was because that summer I was starting to tour colleges. It was just before my senior year of high school, and I had to start preparing for college applications. I had no idea what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, but I toured a few colleges in Minnesota, which is where I am. I saw MCAD, Minneapolis College of Art and Design. I grew up thinking that you had to be naturally talented at art. Either you were lucky enough to know how to draw or you weren't. But clearly there are art schools, and why would there be a school for something that can't be taught? This watercolor self-portrait was a turning point. I just think there's something special about it. I've tried many times to improve or redo this painting, but I've never been able to outdo it. I still really like this painting, and at the time it motivated me to do even more of them, and we'll see that in the next sketchbook. Because I wanted to do more painting, I figured I needed a mixed media sketchbook. This is a sketchbook I saw everyone else using, despite the paper being so awful. We're still drawing Dan and Phil in this one, but there's more paintings too. This painting with all the reflections in the bottom part, I think this had so much potential, but unfortunately was definitely sabotaged by the quality of materials I was using. In most of these books, you'll see me trying to make paintings on paper that's not meant for paintings. And learning about art supplies, I think that's a part of learning how to make art that's not really talked about. It took me a really long time to learn this lesson. On the other hand, something I picked up quickly, especially in this painting on the left, was a fundamental understanding of color theory. I'm obsessed with the colors in this painting, even still. I was also experimenting with ink and line work. I didn't really like using pen, but I felt like I needed clean line work for these illustrations. I remember at the time watching a bunch of tutorials on YouTube, which is why I started painting these acrylic landscapes. I think this UFO painting is still really cool. I don't know why I was only doing landscapes with the acrylic paint, because now that there's more portraits here, they're all in watercolor. I think this sketchbook and the next one were both such an interesting part of the journey of learning how to make art. I'm clearly lacking in knowledge of the fundamentals, and my stylistic choices are basically a result of trying to imitate the fan art I was being inspired by, but I clearly have some intrinsic knowledge, and looking back, I see so much potential here. This sketchbook is a lot more of the same stuff. There's this pastel Dan and Phil painting. This one did numbers on Tumblr. I was on Tumblr. I'm still on Tumblr, but I was on Tumblr too. You also might perhaps notice a sudden improvement in some of these sketches. These drawings are suddenly kind of looking like real people, maybe? They've got more realistic proportions and shading for sure. Well, this is after I took my first drawing class. We'll look at the sketchbooks from that class in a moment, but we've moved into fall of 2017, which is when I started my college classes. I was taking first year foundational graphic design classes, so my schoolwork will be seeping into these sketchbooks from this point forward. For example, these are some sketches for a movie poster I had to design for a very old French science fiction movie called La Jetée. Jumping back slightly, I took an introduction to drawing class in the beginning of 2017. That class started off with portraits, which involved me and my classmates drawing each other. Because these are all drawn from life, they were all drawing me at the same time. So there could be as many bad portraits of me out there in the world, but hopefully no one else is still holding on to their sketchbooks like I am. But this class would be my first attempt at drawing realistically, also my first attempt at drawing at this scale, and also my first attempts at drawing from life. And then there's a figure drawing section of the class. Gesture drawing is such an important part of learning how to draw. It's also, in my opinion, one of the most intimidating parts. And it still is intimidating to me. I know I could continue to find and participate in figure drawing opportunities, but I'm not as able to go outside my comfort zone anymore. I'm kind of just thankful to my past self I was able to take this class when I did. I don't know if I could do this now, honestly. I'm really proud of these drawings. This class was really a huge leap forward in me learning how to draw. And at the end of this sketchbook are a bunch of mismatched drawings. These are either from assignments or from various other exercises, or I had pulled them out to include in my portfolio. Like occasionally we were made to draw on this butcher paper. The comment about this drawing from my teacher is very interesting to me. He said, "A gorgeous drawing, as always. You have impeccable technique and a very strong understanding of the human face. I only worry that the irises you've drawn are a little bit too big." Lovely. This was very nice of him to say. It was a huge compliment, like gorgeous, impeccable technique. I think it actually kept a picture of this grade and the note, and I would regularly look at it. Unfortunately, it did not seem to matter to me that he thought the irises were too big, because I would continue to draw irises the same way for many years to come. Here's sketchbook number 4. The toned gray paper was a huge mistake. I think I liked the idea of doing more charcoal drawings. Unfortunately, I did not do even 1 second of critical thinking because I would have realized I like to use my sketchbooks for note-taking and ideation and brainstorming. And also I'd never made a charcoal drawing outside of glass, so I hated this one. There are a couple cool drawings and paintings in here. I'd tape in other pieces of paper so I could make paintings still, but basically everything else in here is just hard to see. I was taking a class at this time where every day we would do these warm-up sketches for symbolism for each letter of the alphabet. So that exercise helped me get through this sketchbook a bit quicker. I did try using acrylic paint a few times, and the colors really popped in those paintings, but this paper did not handle paint well at all, and it was really frustrating. I ended up just using a white charcoal pencil to try to take advantage of the gray paper. It wasn't worth it to have bought an entire gray sketchbook to do that. I did learn my lesson though, because my next sketchbook was basically the same one, but with the white paper I should have been working on. I was still finishing the alphabet project in this one, but with these Sebastian Stan sketches, I also started a new one, and that was the 100-day project. Starting May 14th, 2018, the goal was to draw something and share it to Instagram every day for 100 days in a row. The reason I started this project was because I noticed my sketchbooks were pretty lackluster, especially compared to the stuff I'd made in my drawing class. I didn't have a lot of time to draw because I was so focused on my design classes, but I was out of school for the summer and I finally had time to do something about that. Something I wanted to replicate from my drawing class was the amount of output that it had. I finished those giant sketchbooks in just a couple of months, and it was taking me years to work through these tiny books. Continuing the progress I had from that class and continuing to get better at art meant making a ton of it, so that's where this project came in. As a portrait artist, I wanted to draw a lot of different people, mostly celebrities, but the goal was to draw each of them a couple of times from a few different angles. This really pushed me on my ability to capture likeness. Even though I wasn't using charcoal anymore, drawing from multiple angles was still helping me to learn the same form and dimension. In this next sketchbook, I'm still finishing up my 100 days, but there's also some stuff for my classes. I was taking a sculpture class at this time. I also wanted to quickly talk about the curation of this video because obviously I haven't been including every page from every sketchbook. I wanted to include as many drawings as possible. I've left in the best ones and the worst ones. Most of the drawings that were cut out were pages that were hardly filled or ones that made everything feel repetitive. You don't need to be watching me flip through the pages and continually rotating the sketchbooks because for some reason I always like to draw in landscape. I swear every other artist I've seen show off their sketchbooks, they're always drawing in the pages vertically. And then a similar complaint is everyone talks about wanting to make the spreads in their sketchbooks all aesthetically pleasing. But if I try to show off spreads, it just looks like 2 pages with sideways drawings. There were a couple of days that tripped me up in this 100-day project, but I was able to complete the challenge, which was really motivating. This was my final sketch here, but I ended up coloring it digitally before I shared it. To reflect on that 100-day project, it was the first time I was able to consistently make art for myself. This challenge gave me the motivation to turn drawing from an interest into a daily habit. Instead of just drawing whenever I felt like it, I was consistently drawing every single day. There was not a lot of time to be analytical or overly critical about my art. And I'm a perfectionist, but this challenge prevented me from doing my usual overthinking. And in terms of trying to continue to learn how to draw, I was able to have a lot of consistent practice trying to get into the routine of making art every day. However, where my earlier sketchbooks felt more like mechanical repetition, I was making the same stand and fill drawings over and over again. Here, I was pushing myself outside my comfort zone and being more intentional about deliberate goals or skills I wanted to develop. By trying to draw all these different celebrities and even venturing into digital art, by the end of the challenge, I was able to see noticeable improvement in my art. These next couple of sketchbooks are both Canson mixed media sketchbooks. At this point, I've had a few of these sketchbooks, and I don't know why all of a sudden the pages started ripping out so easily, but that's why there's a bunch of washi tape in this one. But a lot of these drawings were for pieces I had finished digitally. I don't really do this anymore now. Like if I make a digital drawing, I just do the whole thing digitally. At the time, starting with the sketch was a really nice process. Now, I want to delve a little bit deeper into if anyone can learn how to draw. I think it's actually kind of a similar conversation to whether or not you should go to art school. As for my art education, I didn't technically go to art school, but I did study art at a school, at a state university. I went to the U of M. I got a Bachelor of Fine Arts in graphic design and then a Bachelor of Arts in art. For my BFA, I actually graduated with honors, summa cum laude. I think graphic design is definitely one of the sillier degrees to have graduated with honors, but I did pretty much just take school really seriously. Though if I was actually serious, I probably should have done honors for both of my degrees. Anyway, most people, if they want to draw as a hobby, won't be going to art school, and that's totally fine. I think making art is human. Like the act of creating is an innate human instinct. We should all be making art just like we should all be listening to music, singing, dancing, communicating. But I think making art casually, but still wanting to learn how to make good art can be frustrating. When I was just casually trying to teach myself how to make art, I didn't see any real progress. But then I started taking classes, and then I had 4 years to dedicate to art. And then still, I feel like I'm exponentially better at art now than even when I graduated school. It takes a lot of work to learn how to draw. I think there are some people who are naturally suited to art, just like every other interest and career there is. Despite like art being a skill, there are innate qualities that make some artists more likely to succeed in however they might define that success. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I think even in my earliest paintings, I had an aptitude for color theory. So in my journey of learning how to make art, I started out at a place where I wasn't naturally talented at all, but I would say I had that innate knowledge of color. It's just something that clicks in my brain, and I've never had to spend any time learning how to use colors, how to choose color palettes, or even really how to mix paint. My drawing classes were such a challenge to begin with because I wasn't able to use that thing that came naturally to me. Instead, I was thrown into the black and white charcoal. But those were the times I noticed significant improvement in my art, and they fundamentally changed the way I thought about drawing. There's a reason why basically every drawing class will have you start out with charcoal, though we used both graphite and charcoal. But charcoal, I think most people think about artwork in terms of line. If you think about it, our exposure to art usually starts off with cartoons, lines with flat shapes of color usually. As a beginner artist, a lot of the artists I admired had very stylized styles. And then working with charcoal almost had me thinking like a painter, thinking in shapes and plans, capturing lighting and form in 3 dimensions. And I realized thinking like a painter comes a lot more naturally to me than thinking like a drawer. I can't imagine how long it would have taken me to get to this point in learning how to draw if I continued down the path I was headed, where I was still trying to teach myself and doing the same thing over and over again. Another thing about taking this class was that for the first time, I was able to receive critique and constructive criticism. So in a sense, it was less about learning how to make art and more about being told how my art could be improved or how my art was being perceived by others. By participating in critiques, I was able to grow as an artist, produce better work, and even just share what I was making and working on. I wouldn't say I specifically learned a lot in the art classes I took. Obviously, the critiques were extremely helpful, but other than that, there wasn't much teaching in these classes. It was like each class, especially the studio classes, just provided a structured time to work and then provided assignments, like each assignment or project was a specific challenge and provided goals or objectives to focus on. And it was up to each person to decide what they wanted to get out of the class, and that would basically determine what kind of effort they would put into the class. There were a lot of non-artists who took that introduction to drawing class. Being at a state university, a lot of the introduction art classes were open to non-art majors who either needed an elective or were trying to meet a lib ed requirement. But I was so passionate about being able to finally take a real drawing class, I put everything into it. So I think to some degree, anyone can take art classes and learn how to draw. And I don't believe anyone is born with natural talent, but I do think a lot of people who learn how to make art discover that they either have a skill or a trait that speeds up the learning process. It could be anything. And I think aspiring artists have to have a willingness to go through the process and dedicate the time and effort it requires. Now, back to the sketchbooks. This might be one of my books with my favorite work that I've done. It starts off with all the typical things: fan art, random experiments with random art supplies, random people from Pinterest. But I was also taking some of my favorite classes ever. This lettering was for a typography class I was taking. I was doing some ideation for a font I was working on. I was also taking a comic and zine class. These are the original sketches for the first assignment I turned in. I guess it's not even the work itself in here, but I see so much experimentation and ideation. I haven't really worked on projects like this since I graduated from school. A lot of the times now, if I'm making a digital drawing, I just start it in Photoshop and I don't even have a sketch to look back on. But here I was trying something different. I'd been wanting to do more storytelling and concept-based stuff in my work, which is why I was interested in comics. But at the same time, I was kind of dreading these assignments. I didn't feel like I had anything to say, and anything I could come up with didn't feel like it was good enough. And with this work, I was definitely overcompensating for these feelings. I put so much extra thought and care into these projects. I wasted a lot of time being insecure, and it's scary to be publicly bad at something, but I'm so proud of this work. And I also just love these pages when there's just a bunch of messy drawings and incoherent notes. They're so honest. But unfortunately, the sketchbook just evolved into my figure drawing sketchbook. I was taking an intermediate drawing class, and this was around March of 2020, so that should explain everything. When I stopped physically going into the studio, it was really tough to draw in those giant art newsprint sketchbooks. But all these gesture drawings did help me get through the sketchbook faster, so that was nice. I was making such cool work, and then suddenly there was no motivation to do much of anything. These final drawings were done with ballpoint pen. I assume it was because I was getting sick of the sketchbook and wanted to try something different. I was also starting a project of drawing the characters from Avatar. We'll see more of this later, but starting projects is basically my go-to solution for everything. Now, these are the sketchbooks from that intermediate drawing class. There's a lot of skeleton drawings in this class for some reason. I'm not exactly sure, but the skeleton drawings were some of the most challenging drawings I've done, especially for some of the more gestural, quicker drawings. There's just too many details to be able to draw them without feeling rushed. And these drawings feel kind of messy and unfinished and not in an artistic way. Also, looking back, I just remember all the back pain I experienced making these sketchbooks, both in this class and the original intro class. These colleges and their art departments somehow are always filled with the most back-breaking stools in existence, and it's all I can feel looking at these drawings. But there were plenty of other figure drawings and gesture drawings I did. This drawing class was structured a lot different from that first class in that there were a lot of quicker and smaller drawings. We weren't given a lot of time or opportunity to draw longer poses, and really this class was pretty much cut short in the middle of the semester as we couldn't do any in-person figure drawing or drawing from life. There was also more of a focus on graphite pencil drawings, which are definitely more of a challenge at a larger scale. It's weird, my preferred material for working in my sketchbooks are mechanical pencils, but the fancy graphite pencils were still different enough to be a challenge and out of my comfort zone. Here's a sketchbook I started in May of 2020. It was my first ever actual sketchbook meant for painting. It handled the paint really well, but unfortunately, because it was meant for painting, that meant I felt like I could only make finished paintings in it, which put a lot of pressure on anything that went in here, and that was frustrating. You can tell I'm really trying to rush through a sketchbook when I insist on taping other things into it. I feel like I'm wasting my money if I don't paint on both sides of the paper, but it was a quicker way to fill all of the white space that was taking forever to do, and I just wanted to be done. I was doing this series of characters from Avatar, The Last Airbender. I did really enjoy this series. As I said before, the two things that come naturally to me as an artist are color and painting, and with these being black and white line work drawings, these were basically torturous to make. They turned out surprisingly well, but unfortunately I ran out of characters. And I'd only gotten through half of this sketchbook. I would like to revisit this style and maybe keep working in the sketchbook, but I don't know if I have the patience now for this kind of stuff anymore. This sketchbook I started in the fall of 2020. Similar to a lot of sketchbooks we've seen so far, it's filled with a bunch of stuff, ranging from fan art and then stuff from school. I was taking a bunch of classes at this time: user experience, advanced screen printing, graphic design portfolio, and an honors critical theories class. I was also starting to research for my senior thesis. I had so much going on at this point. A lot of these portraits happened over winter break, which felt like the calm before the storm. So these are all very self-indulgent portraits while I had the time to be making them. And I knew I would not have the time to keep making art like this because I was then going into my final semester, my final year of school, which on top of finishing my thesis, I was doing watercolor painting, digital illustration and animation, and a professional practices class, and also a second capstone project for my second art degree. There's definitely this trend of a fluctuating focus on my sketchbooks. Even though I was studying design and art, I was only able to be the most quote-unquote productive in my sketchbooks when I was out of school, like this winter break I just showed. The first 100-day challenge was over the summer, and I didn't mention the second time I did that challenge, but I did that the next year over the summer again. I was doing the absolute most while I was in school, and sometimes that meant being less dedicated to sketching for a few months. These last couple of sketchbooks are from my watercolor class, which reinvigorated my interest in watercolor. I had basically done some watercolor paintings on and off over the years, but this class was an entirely different experience. Part of it was having actual decent quality materials. We were also required to use certain techniques like wet-on-wet painting. I felt like I'd only ever used watercolor as a way to color in drawings, but this class forced me to make artworks that were actually suited to the medium in which they were made. I'm really proud of the pieces I made for this class. While we look through the rest of these paintings, I just want to say those were all my sketchbooks. If you watched this whole video and or you watched the last video I made, I just want to say thank you. I've got so many projects in progress at the moment, but I'm hoping to make more videos soon. These past couple of videos have been not the most original, but I want to make more stuff. I want to make more video essays and maybe either more informational or commentary videos about art-related topics, but I've got a lot of stuff to say. I've got lots of ideas. But we all need to be patient. So if you're interested, stay tuned, tune in, stay tuned in. Okay, thank you.